Right now we have someone who just arrived, actually, for about 2 hours ago. Professor Lance Gunderson from Emory University in Atlanta, and who has been a key source in key orchestrator in the Resilience Alliance, and been working for a long time with Buzz, and is co-author with Buzz on the book Panarchy. So it's Lance Gunderson, and it's really, really nice that you came all the way for this day and tomorrow.
Thank you. So I usually start off my talks like this with a little joke. So my last name is Gunderson. My ancestors came from Norway. And I'm what folks call an extroverted Norwegian. And the way you can tell that is I look at your shoes when I talk to you. So why in the world do I start off? Well, at least you laugh. My wife doesn't laugh at my jokes anymore, and I say, well, why don't you laugh? And she says, well, they're not funny. So I thought it was very appropriate to start off with a joke for a number of reasons. One is that one of the best things that Buzz taught me in the 2 decades or so I've had the pleasure to work with him is that all of this is fun. And part of the creativity that goes along with all this is about having fun and enjoying it. The other thing about jokes is jokes are surprises, right? That's why they're funny, right? They're not what you expect to happen, and so we laugh in reaction to them. So I think it's totally appropriate that I start off this with a somewhat funny joke. At least most of you laughed at it. So I'm going to talk about uncertainty and surprise, and I really wasn't expecting this, so it's a bit of a surprise to me about the audience with this big hall and all these people and stuff. So here, hopefully it'll work. Okay, so one of the things that I think Buzz has introduced, at least to me and to a lot of the colleagues that we work with here, is that there are fundamentally different kinds of uncertainty that we face in the world, in our lives, in these complex resource problems, whether they're at the global scale, the regional scale, or the local scale. And I really learned this in a series of workshops when Buzz kept asking, well, what kind of problem is that? Is that a problem of science? Is that a problem of politics, about what people want? Right? So, and that's been articulated by many of the co-authors in here about this idea that there are fundamentally different kinds of uncertainty, and that it's important to realize that because we deal with those different types of uncertainty in different ways. That is, we create different kinds of institutional arrangements, different kinds of thought processes, different kinds of paradigms for dealing with and trying to make sense and understand that uncertainties, right? And so I kind of, being simple, the Norwegian background thing, think about these in 2 kind of simple categories. One being kind of technical, scientific, objective uncertainty. That is, what do we know? What do we think we understand about these complex theories? This is really where science lives, right? About probing the world through testing ideas and measurements. And a lot of scientists sort of get wrapped up in uncertainty around variables and parameters. Do you have the right model? Is it the right structure? Are the parameters, or even worse, is it measured properly? What is the accuracy of it and stuff? And as Buzz said earlier, he sort of introduces these kinds of uncertainty that, quite frankly, make a lot of us feel uncomfortable. When he starts talking about things like things that are fundamentally unknowable, it's like lions, tigers, bears, oh my. Right, so I think this is really one of the important contributions. And then lots of my colleagues, like Francis Wesley, have really picked up on this and talked about it. These different forms of uncertainty that we grapple with. And I think Buzz has always not just articulated that, but really confronted the uncertainty. Right? And he's done it in, as Gary suggested, both a practical way, that is, not just how do we deal with these real problems in the real world, whether they're climate change or eutrophication, right? And in the scientific world. And as Gary said, he's iterated between those two and argues that one enriches the other. And I agree totally. It resonates with all of my experience. Now, the one thing that Buzz continues to argue about in these different ways of recognizing what we don't know, all right, are these competing explanations or competing hypotheses around issues. Right? It's one of the good things that scientists can do whenever there's an uncertainty about, well, why is a lake suddenly green? Why is the world suddenly hot, right? Scientists are really good at coming up with these alternative explanations. But then what happens when it moves into practice is that most of those explanations are discarded. I'm not an economist, but I would bet a dime to a dollar, actually I would bet more than that the recent bailout activity in the U.S. in response to the financial crisis did not acknowledge alternative explanations about what led to that crisis. What are these competing models? What are the underlying factors here? And in terms of then what you do about it. And I'll come back with some ecological examples of why that's really important. In explaining more of this practical thing. So this is a shameless picture of my grandson. And I think it captures a lot of Buzz's approach to dealing with uncertainty, right? It is. It's this wonder, this joy, but it's in action. It's not in thinking, it's in doing, right? And this is my grandson, Jackson. He's playing with the wind chime, so he's got a stick there, and he's making sounds out of it. But I think that that's really what the essence is here of probing that uncertainty. We can't analyze our way out of it. The only way we can deal with it is to probe our way into it. So one of the practical results of this, as Gary said, is this whole approach that is, again, sort of following this same time course dynamics as the ecological idea of resilience, of dealing with resource management, called adaptive environmental assessment and management, which Buzz and crew at YASA in the mid-'70s developed. And it has this same kind of feel or flavor, if you will, of using a whole bunch of different methods, right? And to probe the different kinds of uncertainty that are around these resource issues. And to integrate these processes, right? I think this has been another sort of aspect of Buzz's scholarship in applied activity, is that these much more productive and success comes out of integrating these activities, so, such as this approach. So I think it's fair to say that this has pretty much, at least in the U.S., replaced almost every governmental-based way in which they manage natural resources. Everyone is doing adaptive management, at least they say they are if you ask them. Okay, so getting back to this idea, the heart of adaptive management is trying to, and this is building on this notion of uncertainty. When we're uncertain about some things, the best we can do is come up with these competing explanations, right? This is really the heart and the value of what the IPCC has contributed to climate change research, right? Is this ability to not just articulate these alternative models or explanations, if you will, and then battle it out in the literature, right? That's the sort of traditional scientific, you know, my model will beat up your model, you know, and I published in this journal, so I must be right. But what Buzz brought is it said that, well, you have to have these other forums in which these competing explanations are developed. That's really the power of science. That's the power of adaptive management.